welcome to the Smarter Together webinar series. This is where we bring you informed information on impactful research in our community and around Georgia. Greg McCormick, I'm the director of the Georgia Smart Communities Challenge. If you haven't been with us before, we're happy to host you for this webinar where we're speaking with a number of researchers from Georgia Tech and from around the state who are doing very interesting projects that are impacting our communities in important areas. Before we get started, I want to let you know that we are recording today's webinar, and that recording and today's presentation slides will be available for download later on our website on the media page. We will go through the presentations and the discussion, and then we'll be taking Q&A from you in our Q&A area, so please feel free to ask a question at any time, and we'll get to those questions at the end of today's presentation. So we're very happy to have with us a number of distinct panelists today. I'd first like to introduce Lee McCook, who is the Deputy Director in IPAT, the Institute for People and Technology here at Georgia Tech, as well as the Division Chief in the Socio-Technical Division here at GTRI. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you, Greg, and welcome everyone. Susan Belmonte and I are very happy to have the opportunity to co-moderate this panel today. So you guys get a special treat because you actually have two moderators for today's panel. In addition to the roles that Greg just spoke about, I'm also the STEM at GTRI Director for Georgia Tech Research Institute. So in that capacity, I've had the opportunity to work with several of our panel members. I'm hoping to be able to work with all of them. Before I turn it over to them, Susan, will you give a brief introduction of yourself and your roles at Georgia Tech?
Sure. So my name is Susan Belmonte, and one of my roles is the pre-teaching advisor at Georgia Tech, and I work specifically with undergraduates, graduate students, and alumni who are considering careers in K-12 education. My other hat that I wear is I'm also in the Center for Education Integrating Science, Mathematics, and Computing, also known as SEISMIC, which works across the state with teachers and students in multiple ways, as well as robust research in STEM education in particular.
Thank you, Susan. So I would like to introduce our panel first, and we'll give each of our panel members some time to talk, 5 to 7 minutes to talk about their programs that impact our conversation today, which is the development of our future workforce, both at the K-12 level as we can dive into computer science in particular, but also as we look at workforce development outside of K-12 and even post-secondary school. So for our panel members today, we have Brian Cox, who is the computer science lead for the state of Georgia, Georgia Department of Education. Thank you, Brian. We have Kamal Bob, who is the director for the Constellation Center for Equity in Computing at Georgia Tech out of the College of Computing. And we have Andre Dickens, who is the vice president of Tech Connection, and we want to hear more about that, and Atlanta City Council person. So thank you all for joining us today. And if we could, Brian, could we start with you?
Thank you, Lee. Can everybody see my screen? Hoping so. All right, so I'm Brian Cox. I am the computer science specialist at the Georgia Department of Education. I wanted to give a brief overview of where the DOE is in regards to computer science and how that plays a role in the workforce development for the future, for today and for tomorrow. So a quick overview starts with the fact that computer science is moving from an elective in high school to a full K-12 discipline. We recognize that the skills, the computing skills that we find are valuable across the board for all of our students. So we want to make sure that they all have the opportunity to engage. Historical context, about 5 years ago, the governor created a task force to do just that, to take computer science and move it from elective to a broad discipline. And the following year, I was hired as a CS specialist. I was the 4th in the nation, so Georgia is still one of the leading states in this space, but we still have a lot of work to do. CS for Georgia was established in the following year, and CS for Georgia is a collective impact organization full of stakeholders from a wide variety of contexts that all have an interest in broadening participation in computer science education. Some of my strong partnerships are developed with some of the people on the call, Georgia Tech GTRI, the Constellation Center for Equity and Computing out of Georgia Tech's College of Computing, as well as Seismic, which is a STEM center out of Georgia Tech as well. But there are lots of partnerships in CS for Georgia that help us push this agenda forward. In 2018, we established a state plan and also started working on helping districts develop their plan for implementing computer science. We haven't had a new implementation for a new discipline in, a millennia. So it's been a while. And so, all the different touch points and challenges that come with implementing a new discipline into an existing education system, we're helping them work through that. In 2019, we passed the first K-8 standards, which is essentially transformed computer science into a K-12 discipline. We also got legislation that requires computer science to be offered in middle schools and high schools. That was Senate Bill 108. And that bill also came with some allocated funds that turned into a capacity grant, which we funneled through the DOE to the school systems to help them train teachers to become computer science teachers. We found that one of our stopgaps is the number of computer science teachers that are available to teach CS in our schools. So that's been kind of the focus for the past few years. As I said, Senate Bill 108 requires all middle schools and high schools to offer computer science in Georgia by the years 2023 and 2025, respectively. That is for the most part, a pretty standard legislation, except for the fact that we include middle schools because we recognize that in order to build identity around computer science, we have to start as young as possible. The legislation also mentions some recommendations that we do some computer science instruction in elementary as well. This is the growth of our teacher capacity in computer science. If we're looking at the number of schools that exist, the high schools and middle schools, we have close to 1,000 schools in Georgia. And as of now, we have a little over 400 credentialed computer science teachers. That's the work. It's between now and 2025, we need to bridge that gap to make sure that we have enough teachers to teach CS in our K-12 school system. And one of the conversations that we're having now, one of the main conversations is that now that we have this legislation that's going to require access to computer science, how do we go beyond access? How do we make sure that all students in Georgia have an opportunity to experience this education and be involved in this workforce development pathway? And that's some of the things that we want to talk about today, and one of the main focuses for a lot of our work at the DOE and with CS for Georgia going forward. Lee, back to you.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. And unfortunately, we were not able to see your slides, and we can bring them up as they relate to questions that come up, or if you have an opportunity to pull them back up, we can come back to that. So I apologize, we just realized that we couldn't get those up. And there you go. Okay.
I had the wrong screen shown probably.
Okay.
It's okay. I'll share. We'll share them afterwards.
Here we go. Okay. All right. We will share those out with everyone. So thank you. And refer back to that, I'm sure, in some of the questions that we can bring those up. Dr. Bob, would you like to talk about Constellation Center and your perspective and ideas on this issue as we move forward in computer science and education and workforce development?
Sure. Thank you. This is all a little funny because everybody is like personal friends, so it feels like we're just talking to each other. As you point out, I guess by way of introduction, and even looking at the attendees, I know a number of people there as well. The Constellation Center for Equity and Computing is in the College of Computing at Georgia Tech. I'm the senior director of that. I also am the global lead for diversity strategy and research at Google. And what's relevant about both of those things is the premise of what this computing landscape is, as Brian laid out. And our hypothesis at Georgia Tech is essentially that a little bit of context is that we have a concern about how, as a public institution, we can serve and meet our responsibilities to the public beyond just those students that we actually serve. And in the space of computing, which is central to the economic development of the state and certainly of the Atlanta area, excuse me, it's imperative that everyone have access to the basic computational skill set that is becoming ubiquitous in what it means to be a viable citizen in the modern workforce. And so one of the challenges that we're trying to confront is the forces of gentrification and social divide that are derived from not having access to a certain kind of education. We've taken on that responsibility to try to address that. And so the policy infrastructure that Brian just laid out is essentially the guiding principle that will enable some of the work that we're trying to do. But in these, to be specific about some of the challenges that we're facing, in Atlanta public schools, where Georgia Tech sits physically in the middle of the Atlanta Public School District, and there, a couple of years ago in 2017 or so, there were basically only 2 advanced placement computer science courses being offered for the entire city. And in those 2 courses, there were only 2 Black students. And I think it's relevant now to introduce explicitly the implications of race as it intersects with our efforts to expand access to computing education, and also to think about the relationship between that and what the future workforce looks like, because that will ultimately portend who has access to live in the city. So we're trying to address the municipal reality of what Atlanta and its region looks like. So relative to that teaching landscape that Brian laid out, and some of the dire deficits that the educational system has offered to the vast majority of Black students who live in Atlanta public schools, our hypothesis is that in order for them to have access, we have to help provide it. So what is the context? The context there, as I've said before, is Atlanta is one of the most segregated cities in America. And the school system, for those of you who live here, I'm assuming that we're all kind of Atlanta people. So we know how segregated it actually is, notwithstanding the virtues that we have about being the city that's too busy to hate. Andre is on the city council. So, we have municipal value propositions about what Atlanta is. But the reality is that it's a profoundly segregated place, and that segregation is manifest almost most egregiously in the school system. So there, what our hypothesis is that in order for essentially Black and brown students to have access to computing, we have to build it into their formal infrastructure in the schools that they actually attend. And that is a separate proposition than providing informal learning opportunities, which are complements to what students actually get. So on the ability to provide advanced placement computer science, which we would argue is increasingly just kind of a predictor of your ability to participate in STEM education post-secondary. So there, not to get too far into the weeds, but there's advanced placement computer science, there's advanced placement calculus, advanced placement statistics. And so those things are the things now that students really need, irrespective of what they want to study in college, but arguably to do any of the STEM fields in computing, they kind of need those things to be competitive. So what we're doing, starting with Atlanta Public Schools, is to build a hybrid structure for teachers to be able to deliver advanced placement CS content. And then we, through the center that I run, provide fellows, which are people who are skilled in administering CS education to help facilitate the distribution of those courses. And just since 2017, I know people like metrics of progress, but since 2017, with those 2 schools, we now cover 7 of the 11 traditional public high schools in the city. Our immediate aim is to have that APCS infrastructure built for the entire APS system. And again, for numbers, that's 52,000 students who would at least have access that they didn't otherwise have. The 52,000 students is everyone in the whole system, because ultimately that's the machine that we're trying to address. And I would close with this for our discussion is the challenges that are relevant to corporations and higher ed institutions coming into Atlanta and professing these goals of diversity. They have to be rooted in the reality of what we actually are contending with here. So the propositions that we have this, kind of mosaic of diversity in Atlanta is true. But our public education system here is profoundly broken. So when corporations are coming in to land here, I think that we have to be a little bit more creative in the way that we engage with the school system to make sure that everybody, in fact, has a chance to be here in the future. So with that, I'll kick it to my city councilman, who I voted for, Andre.
Thank you, Kamal. You actually teed up Andre perfectly. I did not say Andre's title correctly. He is President of Development for Tech Bridge, which I think Tech Connect might be a part of Tech Bridge, or you could tell us more about that, and a Georgia Tech alum, I believe. So, Andre, given Kamal's challenge right now, would you address our group, please?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me here. We are all friends, and Kamal, it's good to see you and hear you. And you're going to be blessed with a special place in heaven for voting for me. So thank you for that. I am. If they counted your vote, they did. So I am an Atlanta native, first generation college student. When I went from Atlanta Public Schools from K through 12, APS, and landed at Georgia Tech, only college I applied to, and only person in my family, my whole generation, to go to college, and to be able to go to a college that was right up the street from me, considering that I was in the west side of Atlanta, but had never been on the campus. So while we're going to talk today a little bit about why computer science is important, where sciences are, just, proximity and openness and, being inclusive and appearing to be open-ended, it was a challenge then, and still is a challenge now for college campuses and the sciences. If it's not in my daily walk, I wouldn't know anything about it. And so that's where my conversation starts with the need for K through 12 STEM education, particularly computer science. As mentioned, I'm an Atlanta City Council member, and I am a Georgia Tech alum, and I was on staff at Georgia Tech working in the Office of Institute Diversity and OMED, who literally got me through college. So I returned to OMED to help others get through college in managing programs there for minority students. Did that for 6 years. And then I ran for office, got elected, and I'm the citywide representative for the city of Atlanta and, the chairman of the transportation committee, and also really involved in everything that we do that's related to technology and education. And then I have a day job, which is Tech Bridge. I'm the vice president of development there. And Tech Bridge is a 20-year-old nonprofit that has a mission to to have the innovative use of technology to transform communities out of poverty. And so with that, some of the things that we do there is I started the technology career program that is a way to take people from survival to stability on to success. Taking people that are in poverty, low income, unemployed, underemployed, adults 18 and up, taking them from where they're unemployed or no job at all, or low, a dead end job, a low wage job, and training them on software like Salesforce, ServiceNow, Microsoft Azure, these platforms, train them on these platforms that we have asked the IT community across Metro Atlanta, what are you hiring? When we look at LinkedIn, we look at Indeed.com, we look at all these job sites, we're seeing, okay, it's 100 entry-level jobs for this. If you have a certification in that, if you know this. And so, I said, well, hey, we ought to train people on these skills. If we get certified, will you hire our people? So part of this conversation is to employers, as Kamal started down the path of saying to our corporate community, we're no longer satisfied with you importing talent. You don't have to import talent from California, from New York, from even North Carolina. I mean, I want it to be from someone who is in Metro Atlanta. If you're going to come into Atlanta, and we are growing, we're the Silicon Valley of the South, and we're just Atlanta, and they're the Atlanta of the West, or whatever we want to call everybody. But if you're going to come here and erect a building that's 50 stories and you're going to have 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 employees, we applaud you and we thank you. But that is not the headline. That is not the best headline. Best headline would be, we came here and we help be able to give an opportunity to thousands of people in this community that we're going to feed from and feed with. And so therefore, in these 24 months that it's going to take us to get permits and build this building, we can train just about anybody to fill these roles that we know we're going to need, boot camp style or what have you. And so then after we did that, we turned and we went to the At Promise Center on the west side in Vine City, and then we started training kids. So we do an after school program there where we train youth on how to build web, how to do web development and mobile app development. We also introduce them to drones and to robotics and to various other entry level cybersecurity and so on and so forth. So we're there after school, and now with COVID, we're there doing pods by day for those kids that just can't be at home for one reason or another. They can't do home this virtual school. It doesn't work for them. Their attention span or their household just is not conducive for a number of reasons. We have on-site safe pods that we administer along with our partners at Urban League and Raising Expectations and others. So, and we're going into our second At Promise Center starting in January. So we're growing and doing that. So I just thank all the leadership that you guys are doing at Georgia Tech, at Georgia Department of Education, the TEALS program, Computer Science for All, with Microsoft and others. We're helping to recruit volunteer teachers that are in the IT community. The one benefit that TechBridge has is I can probably dial up 900 CIOs, CTOs, technology leaders around the metro area and in Alabama and Tennessee and get talent in the consideration to be able to help volunteer in training programs, volunteer in after school programs, but also try to get some of their staff to participate in this CS for All that you guys are doing, Brian and Kamal. And I'll stop there and wait for whatever questions you may have.
Thank you. You've all teed up so many questions, I don't know where to start. But I do have a question to start with. Susan and I are also monitoring the Q&A, so anyone on the webinar, if you want to submit a Q&A, Susan and I will ask that of our panelists. But one of the first things that comes to mind, I'm looking at the lack of resources. We've talked about the lack of resources, lack of connectivity, lack of access to technology, and how that impacts our workforce and students. And you provided some examples of some things that we're doing in Atlanta. And also I'm looking out in our rural Georgia. There's a whole swath of area where without the access and the technology, and I'm asking you, Andre, if there are opportunities for modeling some of the programs that you have in Atlanta, and Brian and Kamal, the same thing, Kamal, with what you're doing with Constellations, and Brian, what you see out in some of those rural areas. We hosted an internship program in the summer for around Atlanta high school students, and even then we had 15 high school students. We did virtual internships this year who did not have access to computers. So we found out ways to loan them computers and mobile phones over the summer so that they could participate in an internship, because we didn't want to turn a student away because they don't have access to the technology. What are some of the challenges you see, and what are some of the suggestions for ways that we can meet that? I'll turn it to all of y'all, and whoever wants to answer to start that question.
Brian, you or Kamal, you guys want to take that, or you want me to say something?
I can start first with the conversation about access. So the legislation is one version of access to computer science, is to make sure that all the schools have a course. But there are additional variations of access that happen at a more basic level, such as, like you said, the access to broadband, the access to computing devices, and those challenges are exacerbated in rural districts and low socioeconomic districts. So having course in your classroom is just one challenge, but having the ability to engage in that course at a high level, meaning, do you have a computer at home? Do you have broadband at home? Can you go home and do your homework? those are additional challenges that are hitting certain groups of students more harshly than they are others. And we're seeing a lot of that more now with the pandemic, that the ability to have access is palpable. So, what are we doing to address that? Like I said, the legislation helps with the classes. There was some legislation that also helped. It's intended on helping with the broadband, but we're looking for partners to kind of lean in on some of the other aspects of the challenge.
I would argue that that the broadband connectivity right now is essential. It's as essential as just having roads. So being able to go to school now is almost singularly dependent on whether or not you have broadband access. And so I think one of the things, and forgive me here, but in terms of the station that the country is in right now, like we're reckoning with really fundamental ideas of who America is and how it operates. And I think everything is up for grabs right now. I know this is not a political platform, but like we're contemplating coups and things like that. So we can consider whatever we want. And so I think in this instance, if broadband access is clearly the thing that people need to be able to engage in civic participation, whether that be commerce in acquiring food. You live in a food desert and you can connect online. You can get food from Grant Park, where we have local neighborhoods that provide beautiful food, but certainly with education. And so I can show you the map, Lee, that identifies the racial segregation in the city, and it parallels exactly with the lack of broadband connectivity. And so therefore, one of the challenges I think would be to erase that. Broadband connectivity is something that we should consider that's not to be for sale. It's something that is provided as a civic responsibility of the government to its people. And I think, save that, we're going to be operating at the margins and trying to incrementally figure out how to deploy hotspots or a bus or whatever. But we can't do that for the entire state sustainably. It's not possible.
Yeah, I think internet, broadband, Wi-Fi should be a public utility. It should be across the board for everyone. This is the way we transact now. This is the way we learn. This is the way we engage. If it's not the way, it is one of the top 2 or 3 ways that we do that. So just as we see transportation, roads and highways, we created the interstate system to be able to transact, to be able to, include the rest of the country. That's where the interstate came from, to move commerce. Well, the internet technology is how we're doing that now. And it's unfortunate that there are significant swaths of people in our country that are kept out of that, in rural places for sure, and even in some urban places. And so I think the conversation around digital divide is about access and also just having good infrastructure. And in transportation, I often talk about this. Is the reason why we have to increase our access to transportation and mobility is because it's not just about getting you where you're going each day. It's about getting you where you're going in life, so you can have you get access to opportunity. Well, that's the same, if not even greater, for connectivity and the internet. It's not just about, hey, can Andre log on today to meet his teacher and do this Zoom call? That's critical. That's one thing. Just like, can Andre get to his job? But is Andre now a part of the pathway to success called the internet? Where you're going in life is on this highway. It's just a virtual highway. And if we are missing it and misfiring through all these points, then I am being starved of an opportunity the same way someone in a traffic jam is.
Thank you. I feel like that was a challenge to all of us to continue to keep bringing this challenge and this need and this basic requirement for all of our citizens. Susan, did
I
you
have a
have
question. Yeah, I have a question. Oh, Andre.
One thing about that, it's not magic to make it happen though. It's going to cost money. We need a revenue stream. So gas is our revenue stream. Those taxes on why we get roads paved, why you get all these things on your highways. So there's a revenue stream. It's not going to magically happen just because some cool guy named Kamal says, "Hey, make it happen." No, it's got to happen by some money, and that's where we in this same conversation have to be at the table to say we're okay with a funding stream that comes from this, or this, and that's how you're going to make it possible. It doesn't just magically happen. They have to have a balanced budget. So where do you pull the money from, or where do you increase the revenue stream from? I want to say that.
Thank you.
I have a question. How do you see that COVID has created setbacks that we might not be able to recover from? And how has it also created opportunity to bring into the spotlight problems that we knew were there, like the digital divide? But especially those setbacks, are there things that you three feel may take months, years, may never recover from in terms of education in particular? And if so, what are some ideas you have in thinking about as more companies come into Georgia and bringing them into helping solve some of those problems that are going to be long lasting? Going back to what you were saying about the responsibility companies have to bring in local talent, not talent from across the country. So what are the responsibilities you see that companies coming in, and as negotiations with companies happen, to address the problems we know were already there, new problems that have come up, but also the long-lasting impact on education in Georgia? Help address those.
I wanted to say two things to that. One is, we are really, one problem has opened up the Pandora's box and the exploration and awareness of other problems. Teachers are now able to see that most of the time this kid is with grandma, and grandma doesn't know how to log in and how to do these things. So we are learning now that there is an adult education program that our K-12 is serving multiple needs. K-12 was serving food. K-12 was serving health. K-12, these teachers and these administrators for all these years have been serving so much because these households, a number of them are so impoverished. And then now you say, log on today. Make sure you're on the computer at 9 o'clock. And I have teacher friends that are like, I am literally talking to grandparents most of the day about logging on and about doing this and that. And when the Wi-Fi password changed, to unplug it, to plug it back in, and all these other, how we just, figure it out. We go through a logic deduction of, all right, what's wrong with my connectivity? So figuring out, so we've learned this at the At Promise Center, that we had to have adult education on, how to serve a K through 12 student that's already in a challenged environment, and what a comfortable academic environment looks like, and what you need to be doing or not doing as a parent. It's so tough. And the second thing I'll say is that on the positive side, all that stuff that you get when you're a minority person in the workplace, you're not a good fit. This thing doesn't work out well. You don't talk as much, or, what the hell is casual Friday? I don't know if I'm supposed to wear jeans, khakis, all these other unwritten rules that puppet masters have. And well, now we're all on a screen. And so my work is just my work. I'm going to deliver my work. And so a lot of my graduates of these programs, they actually feel a lot better. They don't have all these cultural funkiness that they got to live up to. Sorry for some of the words I'm using. They don't have to fit in and all that. You're not a good fit. How's your hair and all this other kind of stuff. Everybody's got on jogging pants, and and I'm just delivering work. You told me by the end of the month I was supposed to deliver this coding, this problem, this solution. I get it done, and just pay me on the cycle that you're supposed to pay me, and reward me accordingly, versus some of the things that culture fit ends up being a little off. And so I think that one thing that we're learning is some of these norms that have been distractions can actually now get out of the way so we can be more productive, and you'll have the ability to see, people just shine. I've seen that.
Thank you. Anyone else would want to address that before I move to our next?
I just want to touch on the fact that, and specifically thinking about the situation that we're in now with this pandemic, but even predating that technology has drastically transformed all the industries that exist across the context, right? But education has traditionally been one of the more resistant to change industries. Well, because of this pandemic, it's been forced into that change, that shift in technology. And there are certain aspects of this shift that are not going to go back to the way that they were. At some point, we do want to be able to get back into the classrooms and engage the students. But some of these tools and some of the methodologies and strategies that we're using that are very dependent on digital technologies are going to be persistent going forward in education. Like we're going to have a new view of what K-12 and even higher ed education can look like and will look like. So making sure that our teachers are prepared for that new paradigm, that the students are prepared for that new paradigm, and that they're able to operate within that new paradigm is one of our biggest challenges. The majority of the students that we're teaching in the class now are definitely going to have an online class at some point. Like I remember my first online class, but in high school I didn't have any of those. And in undergrad I didn't have any of those. My first online class was in grad school. But these students are starting to operate online in as early as right now. Everybody's online. You can online in elementary school, middle school, and that's a whole new skill set as far as how to be engaged in that space and learn in that space and be effective in that space. And if we're not doing things to make sure that our students are ready for that, then those students are going to have challenges adapting and experiencing education in the way that we want them to.
Susan, if I may, just one last point there. You asked about concerns and possibilities. So you have to forgive me. I'm a little bit in the winter of my discontent. But I think if to be a little specific about the concerns, because our center and some of the topic of the discussion has to do with computing. And my basic feeling is that if we don't have mathematical maturity, then computing is only limited in the degree that you can actually achieve. So last year in 2019, in the before times, if you remember, before COVID, what life like, those memories are starting to fade. But in the before times, in the Atlanta public schools, there were no public high schools in Atlanta where more than half of the Black students were proficient in algebra in the 9th grade. And there were also no public schools where less than half of the white students were proficient in algebra in the 9th grade. There's a profound racial divide. And I mean, we've repeated these things over and over again. But the vast majority of Black students who, like Andre, so Mays and Washington and Darrell and South Atlanta and so on. So Mays, Doug, and Washington, those schools, their heyday has passed. All respect. But the reality is that their heyday has passed. So in most of the big juggernaut Black high schools in Atlanta, less than 20% of the Black students there, and those are nearly 100% Black students, less than 20% of them are proficient in math in the 9th grade. So their ability to participate in anything that requires numeracy and analytical maturity is limited and constrained already. And now we enter COVID. And COVID, as you know, has just decimated American public education. So all of those words now that are going to be associated with that schism, the disproportionate word, disproportionate dot star, you put whatever you want at the end, it's going to disproportionately affect a particular group of people. And my concern now is that the health implications that's going to affect the teachers is going to translate into their exodus from the teaching profession, because so many teachers were already about to go on strike in the before times. So teaching now has become a profoundly dangerous enterprise for health reasons. We also don't necessarily know what the best pedagogical infrastructure is to deliver these classes in this virtual space. And we're doing that on top of students who are already profoundly behind in the key subjects that we're talking about. Some of them didn't even have computer science, let alone mathematics, and we've never been able to close the mathematics divide. So I think the reason I'm a little grim about this is because I think that the changing ideology that's going on in the country right now, one of the assumptions about it, in my opinion, is that all of these people are forgettable. You can just forget about them. We don't need them. They're not necessarily important. We don't have to deal with them. And because we already had evidence of that in the before times, now because we have this bluster of COVID and trying to figure out what all that means, we have something to focus on that we can really distract ourselves from having to contend with what equity and justice means in the educational construct. That's my real concern in response to what you're asking.
Now, we have a couple of questions are coming up in our Q&A that I want to ask, but I want to ask one follow-on question first, and then Susan and I will get to these two in the Q&A. And that goes back to our conversation, Brian with Senate Bill 108 and the requirement for middle schools to have a computer science course as a requirement now, and high schools. Still, there is what are we doing to look at the demographics of the students who stay within those paths, even if they're required to take those classes now? That doesn't impact who's staying in those fields, and how to increase that and close that bridge, that gap that you talked about, Kamal and others, and how do we increase participation among our Black students and communities. How are we looking at addressing diversity and equity overall in computer science education?
There are some districts that are taking very innovative approaches. I know that, for instance, Thomas County is a rural district in very, very South Georgia, almost in Florida. And for Thomas County, K-8 computer science is compulsory. Like, those schools are, those students are going to have some sort of an experience in those classes. Similar in Richmond County up by Augusta, we have a new middle school course which feeds into our high school cybersecurity courses. It's called Foundations of Secure Information Systems. And both Richmond County and Columbia County ran all of their students through that middle school course, right? So in that vein, you get all the students have participation, all the students have access and engagement in that regard. But even that in of itself is not going to be enough. We definitely have to help teachers and schools and parents and students help students to build identity around computer science, so that they can see that they'll be more that they can be successful in this space, and that this is a viable option for them. Students start to make their ideas about what they're going to do with their life and their careers and whatnot, and what they like and what they acclimate to very early, like middle school, elementary school. But if we wait till high school to address them, then they've already decided that this isn't for me. So making sure that we can build identity early around the fact that computer science is for everyone, whether that's in school or out of school, whether that's in the classroom or in the home. And we have to address our personal biases in order to do that. Research shows, there was a research report by Google and Gallup that said that girls are less likely to be told that they'd be good at computer science. And then, of course, we still go back to some of the physical challenges, whether or not they have access in the home. Because if they don't have access in the home, they can't develop that identity along. One of the reasons I got into this is because when I was young, I didn't have computer science in my high school, but my father brought computers home to play with. And this is, at the early advent of the internet. And he's excited about bringing these huge boxes to the house and talking to me about what their opportunities were going to be in the future. And because of that, I got into this space. Well, everybody doesn't have that. So making sure that they have some sort of an opportunity to build identity around CS is one of the strategies that I'd love to see more of our partners pick up, but something that we're definitely thinking about and looking at.
I want to follow up on that, Brian, looking at some of the questions. So I'm the pre-teaching advisor at Georgia Tech, and as I said before, I work with students and alumni that want to become teachers. And perhaps the hardest sell is for a computer science student to go into teaching. And quite honestly, it's because they're going to make, you know, $15, $20, $30, $40, $50,000 less just in their first year. And then it just goes down from there. So, you know, talking about identity, how do we start to build identity for computer science students in college to identify, to think about teaching as a profession that they would go into, not something they'll do after they work at Google, come out you know, later, right? Because that's what I hear. Well, I want to do this later. I don't want to really do this now. I even once told the superintendent, you know, if you would pay teachers $15,000 more, some of these conversations I have with tech students would stop, because they would, oh, well, okay, now it becomes more attractive. And there's a question from Kanya Greer, as she jokes, she's below the gnat line. So those of you who live only in Atlanta, that's a reference a lot of people in Southern Georgia make about where they live, about how do they change this identity of making CS as important as ag sciences. So those are really two separate questions. One more specific to students in college, but then also thinking about how do you start helping communities identify CS as important as other sciences in their communities, like agricultural science. And are there efforts already in place to try to do that?
If I can offer just a quick thought on the first of the two questions. The incentive structure for CS graduates to become public school teachers is, at least fiscally, it's zero.
It's not there. Yeah.
They're having to make a kind of a cherubic sacrifice to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would argue that an interesting conundrum for me is, on one hand, we have the premise that says that we need to have a more robust teacher core. And so relatively to the question that you asked about diversity, for example, there's the case, a reasonable one I would argue, to be made that you have to have a more diverse teacher core itself. Like you could have, you know, Black and Hispanic teachers, etc. But in the computing space, would I be on ethically strong footing to encourage a graduate in CS who's Black from Georgia Tech to become a public school teacher if I already know that that's going to relegate them to the bottom of the middle class, when our larger ambitions is to make sure that we have a more burgeoning, diverse middle and upper middle class? And so if NCR, Google, etc., takes that graduate and pays them $140 or $150 or $170 or whatever, and alternatively you go into some high need area and you're getting $40,000 or $50,000 plus all of the headaches, does that make sense? And it's a question. I mean, it's, you know, people are going to make their individual choices regardless. But I think we're thinking about the institutions that we represent. So we're going to be advocating on behalf of thousands of people, trying to get them to do things. So we're looking at leverage points that are aggregates of the individual decisions. And in that sense, it's really, really tricky, which leads me to why our hypothesis with this Constellation Center is that we don't expect for there to be a solution to providing enough physical human beings to actually teach these things. We're trying to complement that with a virtual component such that you can't expect that there's going to be a full cohort of CS teachers to really actually cover the whole state.
Well, I also mean, you know, what you guys are doing with CS for All, and like I said, the Microsoft Teals program and others, you kind of, those are all, you know, allowing people to work in their professions, make the money that they can make at large companies, but also put in an hour or two as teachers, you know, as volunteers in computer science, which is that I think doing that more and more and more and proliferating that across. Now, the challenge is, you know, a lot of the folks that make good money in the technology world, they live on the north side of town. They live up. You know, are they going to go down to the Clayton County schools, the Douglas County schools, the rural county schools for an 8 a.m. class or a 3 o'clock class, fight the traffic and go up. These kind of things are all part of the micro challenges that we have in there. But overall, having companies agree that it is important to have a talented workforce that is diverse, then we need to make sure that we continue to allow these solutions to come from, partnerships that help have these talented people that are in IT to train these kids, and trying to do that in a rural way with hopefully some teachers down there, but also with technology solutions like what you're talking about, Kamal, some sort of platform-based or curriculum that they can tap into virtually. So I know that that's a message that's being received now as new companies are coming into Atlanta. We are talking to them about you got to help be an education partner, as well as a workforce development partner, as well as a civic partner, and you pay for diversity and equity either on the front end or the back end or throughout. But it's going to cost us all at some point to continue to have this income immobility and this income inequality. So we might as well work it as early as possible, from early learning even.
Andre, that leads into a question I'm going to ask from Jerome, but an anecdotal comment to one of the things you said. I worked with a researcher who was part of a program that took retired university researchers and gave them an opportunity to teach in the classroom once they were retiring. The biggest takeaway that individual had was his profound respect for teachers and having no idea all that it took day to day and their role in the classroom with those students. So I think that component of that training and education and facilitation part is also important in making that transition. So one of the question that Jerome James had was, how do you see private capital being able to solve these problems? He spoke especially to broadband, but Andre, maybe you could speak to what your experience has been with some of the companies as well coming in and their response to request and need for them to give more and participate more in this environment, solving these problems.
Yeah, so I think that the work that Brian and others have done in the education space has paved the way for demonstrating that people have an interest in, providing more, improving the skills of the citizenship of this state, that our competitiveness is dependent upon education, and particularly education in the STEM world. So I think, when I start talking to corporations that are looking for tax incentives from Atlanta, looking for loans and all these things and various incentives to come to the city, and we say, hey, if you come in here, we want you to look to hire people from here. The state law does not allow us to require it as an exchange. State law does not require a minimum wage that's affordable. The minimum wage in the state of Georgia is $5 and some change. So we have these grandiose equity ideas in Atlanta, but there's also state laws that constantly want to keep this a business wins versus community, and all these things we're trying to do. And I think that, Brian and pushed the uphill battle and won with some of the legislation that you got passed. But these are certain things that we have to continue to do so that we can, require corporations to be better corporate citizens as they see Atlanta and Georgia as a great place to do business because of its low cost and lower regulations. I'm not trying to add a regulation that's overly burdensome. I'm trying to add a regulation that allows you to get, that help you solve equity on the front end versus solving equity on the way back end where you're cutting $5 million checks or $100 million checks because you done said something or did something you shouldn't have done, and the public is giving you backlash because you're not a good corporate citizen. And so I guess when you're asking me what have we done, we've formulated community benefits agreements and partnerships that speak specifically to each organization, their leadership, making sure that we line that up with their corporate values and say, you need to participate here, here, and here. You need to participate in K through 12. You need to participate in higher education. You need to participate in workforce development and all the other things around your community that you're headquartered or regional offices in. So we're having those kind of discussions. And we're having them boldly because we're Atlanta and we're not going to lose what Atlanta has fought to have, which is, this ability that we can have business and community coexist. And we got to get back to that and be demanding of our business partners.
All right, we have about 4 minutes left. Lee, do we continue to go through the audience questions?
I think we probably have time for one more question, and then we'll get closing remarks from our panelists.
All right, scrolling through. A lot of questions have come in.
Looking real quick, I'll notice that there have been some resources that have been put up in the chat. So I, remind everybody to take a look at those. Daily Hernandez and some information about one of the seismic programs, the capacity program that's recently come out. Not recently, that seismic's been involved in. So also take a look at those during our. I'll throw one in, Susan. I see Doug Nation asked a question regarding incentives for graduates, teachers in underserved areas. Has anyone examined analogous incentive programs such as enticing medical doctors who are entering the career fair to go into rural areas? Are there like incentive programs for educators in computer science or fields?
I know at this point.
I can address that actually. Georgia Tech for a few years actually had a program called Teach for Georgia that was a result of federal grants, and the whole purpose of the grant was to incentivize teaching for 2 years in a rural county, and we were partnered with particular counties. And then the grant would also cover the salary of the teacher, because so many of our rural counties, you have superintendents, you have principals that are also cleaning buildings, that are driving buses. There's just barely enough money to cover the operating costs. And so the incentive was that the grant would cover certification and it would also cover salaries. And again, this was focused at Georgia Tech, and we had very few people that became interested that we interviewed. It was often with the realization of going to live in a different part of the state. And then our one success story who has been, was in Greene County at what was at the time Union Point STEAM Academy, is still teaching. So of that entire grant and all the efforts, we were able to entice one person to start teaching and stay. I can speak from personal experience about that program. It is no longer available, but if there are other programs, I'm not aware of them.
We're at 12:59, so
yeah.
We just have a few seconds of a closing thought. I want to thank each of our panelists. Thank you so much. I think this conversation could have gone on and will go on and will continue. And I appreciate all of you participating today, and I'd love to hear from the people who also attended. So if you have any closing thoughts, come out. Andre, Brian, now's your moment for a few seconds.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I think it's a rich discussion. Look forward to continuing.
Same here.
Great. I think this conversation could have happened could have gone on for another hour and a half. But I appreciate being able to.
Absolutely, all. Thank you so much on behalf of our Smarter Together team. This was a very informed and passionate at times discussion, so we thank you so much for your involvement today. For all of our attendees, we hope you do join us next Thursday for our next webinar on a new topic on retrofitting suburbia. Professor Ellen Dunnan Jones here from Georgia Tech is coming out with a book on that topic, and the panelists from the Atlanta Regional Commission and the ULI Atlanta will be discussing that topic with her. So again, thank you everyone for attending today's webinar, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.